We are here with John Pipkin, author of Woods Burner, a novel. John, thank you for being here on Don't Lecture Me.
Great, thanks for having me.
Now, this is your first novel, yeah?
It is, yes. It's, I guess I should clarify, it's the first published novel. I had worked on a manuscript for a different novel prior to this one that I then abandoned and began working on this one, so this is my first book.
I have to ask you, when people ask you what your book is about, what do you tell them?
The quick answer is that it's a book about a forest fire started by Henry David Thoreau in 1844, the year before he went to live alone at Waldon Pond, and that the novel explores a pivotal moment in his life when he had not yet become the Henry David Thoreau that we know today. So he hadn't written any of his famous works, he hadn't gone to live at Waldon Pond yet, and that the fire, I think it's worth considering as a possible catalyst or something that sparked him into action. But the other thing that the book is about, and the thing that really made me feel that there was a novel here was, I also wanted to write a book about early America. And the more I researched Thoreau's life and researched the pivotal period in his life, the more I began to feel that America itself in the 1840s was in sort of had reached a crossroads where the country was looking for its identity. It was looking for a sense of what it meant to be an American. I think it was 1837 that Ralph Waldo Emerson had delivered the American Scholar Address, in which he's called for it being the time for Americans to start their own culture, basically, to write their own literature, to make their own art, to develop their own culture and not look to European models. So in some ways I tried to use the fire as a point for examining what America was like in those years between the Revolutionary War and the looming Civil War. I think that there's a point in writing a book at which the book itself takes over, or your own inclinations as a writer take over. And I had felt that by focusing on the subject of the fire, it would maintain a certain thematic focus that say an epic story wouldn't have. But as I was writing this, those epic elements started to come back in again, where I found that as I was focusing on the one-day event of the fire, I still wanted to talk about the backstory and the histories of the various characters. And so the fire just became not only a thematic element, but an organizing element that made it possible to talk about these very disparate characters who, to a certain extent, all represent different aspects of American culture at this particular point in history.
Right, and then they somehow come together in the end.
Right, yes. I mean, some of them meet each other, some of them don't. They all have some interconnections, some of which they're aware of, some of which they're not aware of. But I think each of the characters are fundamentally changed, for better or for worse, because of their encounter with the fire in Concord.
And you've taught in Boston, is that correct?
Yes, I was an assistant professor at Boston University for, I believe it was 3 years back in the late 90s. I taught humanities and rhetoric and some writing classes and some literature classes. So
did that help you in writing this book, just the sort of scenery, or did it put it in your head, or did you have it in your head already?
A little bit. I've actually never been to Waldon Pond or to Thoreau's house. I've been cycling through Concord, but I actually haven't been to the actual area where the fire took place. So the book I wrote entirely while I was living in Austin and relied on photographs, obviously contemporary photographs, not photographs of Thoreau's time, etchings of what Concord looked like, and a lot of diaries and letters that described what the area and the town looked like at the time.
Okay. Is it something that you already know about, or you just hear a topic that you like and then you explore it? How much research do you do?
Well, this book actually started when I came upon a line in Harper's magazine, in the Harper's Index. I think it was in September of 2003. There was a line in the Harper's Index that said 300, the number of acres burned down by Henry David Thoreau in 1844. And I had taught Thoreau, and I had taught literature, and I'd studied Thoreau, and I had never heard of this particular event. And then when I looked into it, it's in all of his biographies, and it's a well-documented event, but I don't think anyone has ever explored what the implications might be of that event, what sort of repercussions or cause and effect that might have had in his life. And the more I thought about that, the book began to develop from that particular point. But there are, of course, themes in there that I had always been thinking about, and issues about the development of American culture and trends in American history, and so all of that came together as I was thinking about that particular event.
Can we talk about the language of your book a little bit? It seems to be written in a more archaic style to us, sort of a dialect of the time.
Sure. Well, there were a couple of things I was hoping to achieve. One is to give the book the feel that it actually is representative of 19th century America and what the language may have felt like. And of course, I think every writer who's writing historical fiction deals with that. How do you capture a sense of what spoken language or colloquial language would have been at the time, prior to actual audio recordings of what people sounded like? And so we have to rely on letters and journals and the language of novels from the time. At the same time, I didn't want it to sound like it was a mock 19th century novel, since that's a style that for many people today would be impenetrable or obscure. So I was trying to balance that line between using language and descriptions that would have been appropriate to the period, while at the same time writing in a way that is still accessible to 20th century or 21st century readers. I also I think my style was probably influenced by my background in poetry, since that's what I studied as a graduate student, and what I've taught was 19th century British poetry. The Romantics were my field, and I've always liked the phrase that John Keats wrote to Percy Shelley about filling every rift with ore, that every line of poetry needs to matter, every phrasing should matter. And I think the same is applicable to prose, that every sentence should matter and should be something that is indispensable in the book. And so I tried to apply that advice to my own writing when I was working on this.
All right, John Pipkin, author of Woodsburner, thank you for being here with us on Don't Lecture Me.
Oh, thank you. This has been fun.